Morning, everyone, and welcome to the second in the series of our weekly breakfast clubs. I'm Kevin Harrison. I'm chair of the English committee. We've got some excellent speakers for you this morning. We've got Ben O'Brien, Mike Goodin, and Phil Hadley, and this is about Going It Alone, an early morning debate about future trade of the UK sheep meat, future trade of UK sheep meat. Just a couple of housekeeping things before we start. Toilets are this way, the coffee machine's over here, and in the event of a fire, just go to your back door. But no, seriously, we've got two boxes. We've got the chat box, just put any banter in there, and then the question and answers for any serious questions that we can post to the panel in the Q&A session, and then they'll get picked up easy and they won't get lost in the chat section. So I'm not going to chat. You haven't come to hear me talk. First of all, we're going to go straight to Phil Hadley, who's going to talk about, give us an entire market view, really. Most of us in this country know Phil anyway, but he originally joined the organisation in 2004. In his current role is International Market Development Director. He leads our work seeking export access to global markets, linking with our exporters, UK government departments, and their overseas equivalents to deliver technical solutions and negotiate export approval. Following access, Phil is also responsible for the vision and delivery of our international market development programs to support the growth of exports for our farmers, growers, and processors to deliver stakeholder benefits. With the changes Brexit would inevitably bring, this is a key role for the AHDB. Over to you, Phil.
Thank you, Kevin. I wasn't expecting such a detailed introduction. It sounds like that came directly from my comms colleagues, but thank you for that. So
it's almost as if Will Jackson wrote that.
Indeed. I'm going to just take 15 minutes now to talk about the sheep market overview. I'm going to give some background statistics about levels of production and the retail environment. COVID has been a real impact in retail and food service, of course. And I'm going to take the bulk of the presentation to really talk about the export work that the team and I do. And then I'll just finish up with some of the new reputation work, which is about increasing or improving the perception of meat and dairy in the diet for UK and overseas consumers. So if this moves forward at the appropriate time, which it doesn't appear to be doing. Oh dear. Get ready, Nicola, just in case. Right, Nicola, my screen appears to have locked or frozen. So luckily we did plan for this. So Nicola has a backup copy of my slides, but I apologise for that. Normal service will be resumed shortly.
We've got it actually on a smaller screen here.
Can you see any of those slides, Kevin, at the moment?
See the big slide and the next slide and your countdown.
Really? Okay. Give me a second. I think I'm going to need you to drive the slides, Nicola, because it's locked on my screen.
Fine. I'll bring them up now.
I can't escape it either, so by the looks. Right, okay, let's go with that then. Yeah, apologies for that. Let's crack on. So if you could pop the next slide on, Nicola. Okay, so production is, if you look at the bottom line there on the year, it relatively stable, but a slight tracking down. So within this data, we think about the production, imports and exports, and then the volume available for consumption. So relatively stable picture, but as I say, a slight tracking down in terms of the available product for consumption. Next one, please. And it presented in a different way, but looking at the data for the year. So production is down 4%, imports are down 9%, and Ben might want to push on the reasons for that, given that New Zealand are a large importer into the UK. Our exports are down 10%, and again, largely driven by COVID disruption and Brexit preparedness, and the overall supplies on the market are down 3%. So I'll come on later to talk about domestic demand and the way that's changed in the last 12 months. But essentially, there's a little bit less product on the market than there has been, and food service has been particularly impacted, of course. A lot of high-end, high-quality lamb is eaten in the food service sector, in the white linen type restaurants, and of course, all restaurants have been closed for a significant period now, and that has definitely impacted consumption in the restaurant sector. But at home, consumptions look pretty strong. Next one. So this graph really tracks the year, or more than a year, in fact, and it looks at total grocery spend and the share of meat and poultry within that. So I'll just take a moment to explain that. The blue line is the total spend on grocery. So this is retail sales, etc., essentially. And the green line that tracks underneath is red meat, fish and poultry as a share of those markets. So you can see that February 20, the data tracks a little bit behind, but you can see the obvious effect of lockdown and people eating at home, and the fact that bigger families were coming together and eating together, eating different meals. So a change in the way they started to consume, and the fact that we're all stuck at home. Now, this goes to the end of November. We're yet to see on this graph what's happened in the last few weeks. But the next one, Nicola, will show the last 52 weeks and the last 12 weeks. And you can, just to focus on this for a second, over the last 12-week period, the spend on lamb has been up over 18%. So significant uptick on the last 12 weeks. And if you look at the box to the left is the 52 weeks to the end of December. So the full calendar year, you can see the spend on lamb is up 9%. And in the last 12 weeks alone, the spend on lamb is up 18%. So significant uptick in terms of the value of the market. And not surprisingly, the volume uplift is lower because the average price point has gone up. So increase in the volume and a more marked increase in the value because the price has ticked up as a result of current trade. Next one, please, Nicola. And overall, in the last 52 weeks, total volume was up 4%. And that kind of shows you where that volume growth is occurring. So you can see at one end of the scale, volume change on mince and chopped, and at the other end of the scale, stewing and total roasting is down. So, you know, that poses questions around carcass balance, but overall a positive picture in terms of consumption. And given that more people are eating lamb more regularly, that hopefully bodes well for the next period. So you'll see on the bottom there, volume growth 4%, but that compares to other products, total food and alcohol, or non-alcohol, I should say, which were up 11%. Really reflects the fact that people are at home. Okay, next one. So that's the kind of production and the domestic market position. I'll just come on to the export now. So what do we do in AHDB on the export front? Well, we cover all the 6 sectors to a greater, lesser degree, and the largest part of the work is around the red meat sector, particularly beef and lamb. Export critical to supply chain, carcass balance, and accessing markets and selling products at higher prices elsewhere to really reflect the demand in other parts of the world. Our red meat exports in 2019, that's the last full year data. We'd expect the full year for 2020 in the middle of February, so it's pending, as it were. But to put it into context, the last full year data set 2019, the red meat sector was 1.5 billion of trade in that full year. So as I touched on, carcass balance, sheep sector, of course, deals with the seasonal peak of production in the second half of the year, where we see the bulk of our exports. And it's about making sure we maximise the value from all of those cuts and carcasses on the overseas markets. And we continue to do that whilst also building on the reputation of UK and British products as producers of safe, high quality foods. We have to do that. We're not a cheap producer. There's always cheaper products in the marketplace. So we have to make sure we're selling the story of UK products, the high standards and the natural environment type story, and the grass-based nature of production, make us look different, command that premium in the overseas markets. Next one, please. So we all know this, but it's worth reminding ourselves in terms of exports as a percentage of domestic production. So of all of our products, export markets are important, of course, but specifically for lamb, and importantly for lamb, you can see the impact that has, and that's the 12-month average. And we know that at seasonal peaks, we're in the second half of the year, we export significantly more. So somewhere in the order of 25 to 30%, and on occasion higher, of our total lamb production is export, which really underlines how important the export market is to the sheep meat sector. Okay, next one. And in terms of where that goes, I've got the 3 species here, really to give you a picture of the markets and the values. And this is the first half of the year data. I want you to just take a second and look at those graphs or those bar charts. The blue sections of those represent exports to the EU, and the red caps represent non-EU exports. So just look at how dependent our exports are to the EU from the sheep meat sector, or less than the pig meat sector, for example, who have been very successful in accessing markets in Asia, for example. But the sheep meat sector absolutely relies on European market exports. And you see the number there, 91% of our products in that first half of the year went to the EU, and that's quite normal. 90% plus of our products end up on the European marketplace. So hence the sensitivities and concerns around a deal of some description to ensure that we didn't lose access to that market and then incur the tariff rates, the WTO tariff rate, which was kind of up to 50% in certain products. Okay, next one. And then in terms of our overall sheep meat exports, so again, I'm going to use November 19 data here for the month. We're down 17% on the month, but the value is up markedly. So we look at volume in terms of the amount of product that's sold, but also the value aspect is also very important around that. And you can see there the market fluctuations. Of course, it's not really a normal trading position because of pending Brexit and supply and so on and so forth. But it gives you a bit of an impression about where we are. And so to reiterate that, volume's down, value up. And at the moment, to the end of November, the value was 386 million for the year to date. We've got that December data to come in, and we will land over that 400 million figure. And those figures will be available in the next few weeks. Okay, next one. What do we do across the team in terms of supporting stakeholders with access? Well, it's around the technical market access work and the import risk assessments, working with UK government and the UK export certification partnership. So part of the work is ensuring that we've got export market approval, and we've been successful in gaining a number of export markets in the last few years with a concerted effort to broaden our reach. And we were always doing that, and Brexit heightened that demand to seek other third country markets. We do trade inward and outward missions to those new and growing markets, so we can understand what the dynamics are, meet buyers, customers, and sell the story, building that reputation via trade shows and so on. Of course, COVID's curtailed that activity in the last period, but we've done a number of digital events. We've done an awful lot of webinars like this one, but we've also built some collateral, which I'll come on to in a moment, to demonstrate the profile at a time when we can't actually travel. And we also have some in-market resource, and they've delivered events locally whilst the UK team can't travel. And in fact, we will have a stand at Gulf Food in the next few weeks in Dubai, which is a major trade event for the Middle East region. Of course, the Middle East region being very important for sheep meat exports in terms of growth and the halal sector, but we have an agent there who will host that stand for us. We've also had a focus on China and Asia. working with UK government and the China-Britain Business Council. Asian markets are important in terms of overall export volumes and values. And then we collaborate with UK government overseas to build our support network. And we have an office based in Brussels on the policy evaluation. So we're no longer privy to those discussions and decision-making process from a European perspective, but the ability to maintain that base in Brussels, as indeed Ben's done on behalf of the Kiwis for the last period, make sure that you're in the conversation and you can understand the impact of policy decisions and what they might do to the UK in terms of a trading relationship. Okay, next one. So quickly, just to demonstrate where we have representatives in one way, shape or form. Clearly, from the sheep meat side, good penetration in Europe across 6 countries, and an office in France. We've been in Europe for a long time, of course, and critical to the markets. And the newer positions or the newer posts, Middle East, China, Japan, US, really reflect our growing market access position. So gaining access to these markets. Japan, for example, we gained access for beef and sheep meat in 2019. Not a huge consumer of lamb, I must say, but high value market, of course. And the US, we're working hard to try and get access to the US for sheep meat, having secured beef just last year. So that demonstrates the reach of the type of activity that we're doing, and having agents in the market has paid dividends whilst we've been unable to travel in the last nigh on 12 months now. Okay, Nicola, thank you. So access-wise, we've had recent successes in Japan, as I've just said, Taiwan for pork, China for pork and beef, and the US for beef. But we have ongoing access dialogues, and just to pick up a couple there that will be important for the sheep meat sector. Taiwan for lamb. We were doing an inspection in the spring of last year, but of course that got curtailed. And the same for China, and we're pushing hard. Clearly people aren't going to travel at this point in time, but we're looking at other alternatives, ways to try and move the dialogue along through video audits and cleverer ways to do that. Export health certificates are available on the website there, and you can see the range of certificates we've got, which means that we can ship product to the country. And then we also, on a day-to-day basis, help exporters resolve any market access issues around certification and shipping where they get products stuck or delayed in a marketplace. We support to help them try and move that product on and move that along. Okay, next one. So looking forward, exports continues to be a critical function of the organisation and delivers value to our stakeholders. So we're very positive and in a good position on that. We're building a broader approach to recognise the third country opportunities. We've really got two jobs in that respect. One is to maintain our market presence in Europe and make sure that we continue to have those opportunities available, notwithstanding the additional costs and bureaucracy that we find ourselves in now, but also to grow those emerging markets where they're sheep meat consumers, emerging economies or wealthy economies where they pay high prices for the products and particularly value sheep meat as a natural product. And we've got a great story to tell there in the UK about the type of production. Building the resources on the ground to link up with domestic buyers on their, to talk their local language, as it were. And then we're also building useful consumer insight in some of these markets so we can understand how better to tailor our products and the messages around that to ensure we maximise that potential. Last point there, of course, goes without saying, but the EU remains critical, and especially for the sheep meat sector. I can't emphasise that enough. Okay. And just to finish up on a couple of points in terms of the reputation work. So we've kind of moved in the last few years around the work that we do to promote the product, from moving from an end product marketing position to the general promotion of meat and dairy in some cases, around the role of meat and dairy in a healthy, balanced diet. So if you look at that slide there, the first one, and I'd encourage you to take these, click on these links after the presentation, is that that's a video that is a digital resource that's available now in the overseas markets to promote our products to overseas buyers. It's very much about the family farming nature of UK production and how that translates in their own environment. So that video there is aimed at the Asian market, and it uses pork in this example, but it demonstrates that UK products in a domestic setting with a voiceover in an international language gives you the positive feeling about UK, but also enables overseas consumers to connect with how the products might be served in their own sort of recipe repertoire. And we have we're building and have a series of these looking at specific markets. So trying to promote our products on that marketplace. And the Eat Balanced campaign is countering the veganuary story, and it really highlights meat and dairy as part of a balanced and healthy diet. And there's an awful lot of resources on that, which includes the consumer information, recipes, and promotional material. So I've scribbled some notes down here because as we were logging on this morning, I had the latest data come through. So the TV advert, which I think Nicola's going to show in a moment, has been seen by 70% of UK households. So that's pretty impressive, really, 70%. And there's been over 50 million digital impressions, which means social media type impressions. So that's a really positive story. What I would say just before you click the link is it became apparent that the anti-meat people and a group called Animal Justice have launched a campaign to flood the website or flood the Twitter stream tomorrow with negative messages about meat production and between 5 and 7 o'clock tomorrow. So we've heard about that activity, so we're encouraging people, and I'll share some of this information with Nicola afterwards, hot off the press as it were, to if anybody is active on Twitter and wants to respond in a more positive fashion and tweet pictures of them in their farm or enjoying red meat as part of a balanced and a healthy diet, I'd encourage you to do so. But a successful campaign to date, and it's about promoting meat as a healthy, balanced, nutritious product. If you could just click the link, Nicola, if it works, fingers crossed. I've been pretty unsuccessful with the technology.
We've all got a lot on our plates right now, but here's something you'll want to make room for. The story of a food so natural, it takes the rain from the sky and the plants we humans cannot eat and turns it into something wonderful. Essential nutrients our bodies need to help us stay healthy. Meat and dairy. Enjoy the food you eat. Eat balanced.
The website link that's on the screen now takes you to an awful lot of resources around that. So yeah, that's a sum up of where we are in terms of promoting meat in a positive way as part of the diet. So I think I'm probably on my time or over my time even. So
yeah, that's great. Phil, Nicola, could you post those links in the chat so people could copy and paste them and use them later? Some really great slides there, Phil. Thank you very much. I even saw Ben taking note of some of them there at the start. So obviously some information there for him. So our next speaker, excuse me, is Mike Gooding from Farmers First. Farmers First develops marketing opportunities for UK produced meat, primarily lamb, with a particular focus on the European market. As a farmer-owned, farmer-led initiative, the company retains a fierce independence and a clear remit from its shareholders to bolster the lamb trade. So Mike's talk is about creating opportunities for securing more margin for sheep farmers. So good luck with that one, Mike.
Kevin, thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. I hope you can see my screen. Is that up and running? People see that? Thank you, Nicola. And thank you for the invitation for coming along this morning. I'm going to use my 15 minutes or so to talk about some of the realities of trade and think about where the future lies. it goes without saying, as Phil pointed out, that there was a huge sigh of relief for all of us at the new year that we did have a deal, whatever that actually means in reality. We might have been having a very different presentation this morning if we hadn't received that deal. And Phil has shown just how important the access to market is. Although I have to say, in practical terms, I'm struggling to see what the advantages are at the moment. Victoria Prentice at last week's breakfast briefing, I can't say that, talked about it being hellish, and I'd use slightly stronger language if I wasn't online. It is a real bugger's muddle out there at the moment. And it was interesting that in the Farmers Guardian last week, I saw Neil Parish, the MP for Tiverton and chairman of the Select Committee, talking about Brexit. And I quote, he says, "With an agreement, at least, we are around the table with a formal process to govern our relationships. While things may be tricky for our exporters now, processes can be worked through and streamlined in the next few weeks." Well, all I would say is anybody who's relying on that, don't hold your breath, because I think from a political point of view, 100,000 COVID deaths is probably a more important focus than our customs declaration forms. It's that same reality and realization that 20 years ago led us to form the business, which of course started with the Farmers Ferry and then led on to our two abattoirs, Farmers Fresh and Farmers Fresh Wales. The business now turns over about £100 million, and we process about 10% of the UK's lamb through the farmer-owned, farmer-led business. That's about 1 million sheep a year. And probably about 75% of those sheep are exported, and nearly all of those exports are to the European market. But we've always been very clear in the business about what we were trying to do. And the clarity of purpose, which is to improve returns for UK livestock producers through the development of trade, has stayed at the very centre of our thinking. And it's that clarity of purpose and understanding which I think is critically important to us as sheep farmers. Because when we look at all Phil's graphs and the massive information, it can seem somewhat confusing when actually at the end of the day, it's remarkably simple. It's a function of supply and demand. And when we see tight supply, and there is tight supply in the world, and we see increasing demand, and there's increasing demand in the world, there's more people on the planet, we see our prices rise. And that is the fundamental economic understanding that makes this whole arrangement very straightforward. So with apologies to Ben for nicking some New Zealand beef and lamb slides, I want to think about what's happening around the world and look at some other bits of information. So here are some figures from New Zealand, and the graph to the left, the livestock numbers, is really interesting. Because if we look at sheep numbers in New Zealand, which is the green line, from 1990 through to 2020, we'll see this gradual decline in sheep numbers. Well, a fairly significant decline, actually matched at the same time by the rise in dairy cow numbers, which is the purple line. Beef has stayed relatively stable, but we can see this substitution in New Zealand, one of our most significant competitors, moving from sheep into the dairy sector. A slightly closer analysis of the livestock numbers shows that actually ewe numbers in New Zealand over the last year have changed very little. And this is typical of the sheep sector. What we see is the breeding stock and the hoggets where the numbers move, but the core breeding flock stays relatively stable. And the sheep sector does have an ability to bounce back quite quickly when we see shifts in market demand. So I wouldn't be completely comfortable that this long-term decline in New Zealand numbers means they cannot turn on production quite quickly, because they still have a strong core breeding flock. But what is interesting, I think, when you look at New Zealand figures, and this figure 8 here shows how much New Zealand lamb has been exported to China over, again, the last 10-year period. And we can see a rise in exports to China and the Asian market, which is nearly tenfold rise over that period. At the same time, New Zealand imports into the UK have declined, and that is the lighter grey lines at the bottom of this bar chart, while the total exports to the rest of the EU have varied as market demand has gone up and down. So when I look at New Zealand and I look at what New Zealand is thinking about in terms of its opportunity, they're very clearly focused on the Asian market, and that has to be good news for us. They see a growth in disposable income in the Asian market, which they wish to exploit, and tight global supplies of sheep meat. So all of these things are actually positive news for us as UK producers. Even with Ben on the line, I would say we have quite a lot to learn from our colleagues at the other side of the world. But I want to dispel another myth that I often hear, which is that it's cheaper. The lamb is cheaper in New Zealand and Australia. Here are some figures over from 2010 to 2020, which shows the farm gate prices of lamb on an AHDB graphic. The GB price is the blue line, Australia is in orange, and New Zealand is in the green. And we can see there's been a consistent and gradual rise in farm gate prices over the last 6 or 7 years, up to a point where we are now, where they are almost on a par. We've just got this sort of seasonal variation. So the idea that New Zealand and Australian lamb is entering the processing chain as a cheaper product is not true. When it actually gets out there on the world market, where we're competing in all parts of the world, it goes into the processing part of the chain at a similar price. Perhaps Kiwi farmers are better at securing some of that value than we are in the UK. But when it comes to global trading, we are on a price par with New Zealand and Australia. So let's think about the future, and in typical Farmers First fashion, we'll try and keep it as simple as possible. As Phil has already indicated, domestic lamb consumption is up, and that is great. Much of it is through farm shops. I quote from an HCC press release yesterday: the growth of lamb sales was particularly strong at high street butchers. Independent retailers accounted for 12.1% of total lamb purchases in 2020, as opposed to 9.9% in 2019, with spending up 35% on the year to 79 million. This growth in butchers' shops and independent shops retailing to that increased consumer demand for eating at home has to be good news for us as producers, because it gives us some alternatives to the perhaps more structured and standard retail trade. As Phil said, access to the EU market is absolutely essential. Now, I know we have a deal, but I remain slightly sceptical that we haven't seen the end of that deal yet. So the pressure we have to keep on authority to understand just how important that market is for us in the sheep sector is paramount. Non-EU export market development is really difficult, and we as a company have spent much of the last 3 years or so trying to identify new market opportunities in the Far East and in the Middle East. And I have to say, wherever you go in the world, you will find a Kiwi or an Aussie already there, already selling lamb and doing a very good job. Simply turning up and waving a flag does not generate a profitable trade. We need to do much, much more. Demand is increasing, as Phil has illustrated, and we should draw great comfort from that. If there has been one positive lesson I would suggest out of COVID, it's that at the end of the day, when things really get tough, people still need to eat. And they might choose to eat differently, and they might choose to vary their shopping habits. But food remains an absolutely fundamental for our survival as human beings. It's fairly basic biology, really. What we have to do as an industry is be much, much better at articulating our product advantages and why they meet customer needs, whatever those needs the customers have expressed. So as a farmer, I think what should I be doing when it comes to, what should I be thinking about when it comes to marketing my stock? Some of the questions I ask myself is how do I ensure I get as much of the value back to me from my products? Well, farmers' first shareholders will get their fourth dividend in consecutive years in a few weeks' time, should they vote at the upcoming AGM. And I think we have to think carefully as farmers as to who we trade with. And we should be clear about what other values the supply chain can offer us, whether it's something as simple as understanding cutting, spec and stoppages when it comes to processing, or whether it's about the use of data and how we can connect with our end customers. These are all things that we need to engage with closer as suppliers. And I would encourage anybody with whoever they trade with out there to stay in close contact with their processor and understand how the demands move quickly. It was interesting looking at Phil's figures for November, because I strongly suggest that the figures for December will look quite different, and things in the marketplace move on a day-by-day basis, and we are really experiencing that at the moment through the abattoirs. I think, how do I ensure I understand better the customers actually need, what their needs are and what their demands are? And we need to get much better at that as an industry. We're not terribly good at it, if we're really honest about it. And thank goodness for the work of people like Phil and the HCC in helping us understand those consumer insights. Be very sure if we don't understand them and we don't respond to the consumer needs, somebody else will, and they will grab our market share. And finally, I think as a farmer, how I might promote my land, both to consumers, and Phil showed us the Eat Well campaign, but also policymakers, and where sheep fit in a truly sustainable future. Because at the moment, we are behind the curve on that argument. And people who are anti-livestock have quite cleverly shifted the argument to be about carbon and nothing else. The sheep sector has much, much more to offer in the wider sustainability sector around nutrition, biodiversity, culture and heritage. And all of these things are factors that we have to get much better at articulating as an industry. So, Chairman, just to wrap up my presentation, we're very excited about the future. We see some tremendous opportunities. Now that we know that our access to the European market remains open, that's a huge benefit for us at an industry. And it's a time for us to grasp these opportunities as an industry and build from a position of strength and move forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike. But wouldn't it also be nice to be in a situation like we are, where you show those slides of New Zealand and how they can move their product around to different countries? You know, when the demand for protein is up in China, we can send it there. You know, and when we want to send it to Europe, we can. So it would really be nice to have that opportunity to do it. But yeah, thank you very much. And if you've got any questions, just pop them in the Q&A box there, and we'll answer them all at the end, because then everyone can have a little go at answering them. But it's moved us nicely on to New Zealand, because we've got Ben O'Brien from New Zealand Beef and Lamb talking about competition and collaboration. And Beef and Lamb New Zealand Limited is a farmer-owned industry organisation representing New Zealand sheep and beef farmers. We invest, this is what they wrote, we invest farmer levies in programs that grow the sheep and beef industry and provide sustainable returns now and for the future generations. And Ben's joining us from a long way away, all over just across the water there in Brussels. So Ben, I'll hand it over to you now. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. Look, it's good to be here, and hopefully I can get this all to work somehow. Just need to find which presentation I need to open. From the beginning, it says. Start from the beginning, please. Oh, that's not actually the beginning, but get to the beginning, fair enough. Okay, so there we go. That's the first hurdle dealt with. Right, look, thanks for the opportunity to talk to everybody this morning. You know, to some extent, Phil and Mike have already done my presentation for me, really, putting forward some of the information there from our website. I'm glad it's helping people get the good information. This is what NSA asked me to talk about today: competition and collaboration, and sort of subtopics of market access, product development, adaptation, and reputation, image, and standards. I've modified those slightly. I will be talking about all those things, but probably not in that order, and probably not as individual topics. It'll all be, you'll see I'll magically interweave it all into a fabulous story about how brilliant we do. Perhaps you can be the judge of that. But I'm going to start out with something fairly straightforward here, and something which I'm sure all you farmers intuitively understand. And this is a look here at the New Zealand pasture growth curve, and you'll see, you know, that the growth curve runs through from about September through to April-ish. Overall, these are various regions within New Zealand, and you know, you can see that in Southland and North Island fertile intensive have the highest pasture growths. Don't need to worry too much about the numbers. It's kind of the shape of the curve and the period over which pasture is growing in New Zealand. And I guess probably one of the things that we have learned over the years is that this is when you make your money, is when the grass is growing. Right? That the major component of profitability on a sheep beef farm is the cost of feed. And while you've got cheap grass, you're making money. While you're feeding other things, you're not. So that's kind of meant that, although there have been several attempts over the years, particularly in the days when we had less access than we have now, there was a tendency to think about whether or not we could grow animals in the shoulders of the season and extend our ability to supply over the whole of the year, that being what, you know, your average supermarket or food service supplier wants, is consistent product throughout the year. So that looked at things like, you know, 18-month cycles for lambing, etc., autumn lambing, you know, feeds that would grow through the winter months, etc. Much less so now, and people are a lot more focusing on growing lambs quickly throughout this period. So likewise here, and thanks to the people from AHDB, see, we nick each other's slides, you'll see, is that this is the Great Britain pasture growth curve. You'll see that obviously the months are the inverse of the New Zealand growth period. 2020 was obviously a particularly difficult year, but the overall average, you know, is a curve not unlike the New Zealand one, except that it's offset by 6 months. And that, of course, gives us the opportunity to think about how we in the Southern Hemisphere and you in the Northern Hemisphere can collaborate on providing product over the full 12-month period, supplying into into markets. Yeah. The story on the slaughter side is slightly different. Here we have the New Zealand slaughter graph, right? And you'll see here the big difference here. So in August, right, we're slaughtering around maybe 10 or 12,000 head, 10 or 12 million head. And here, look, we're up around the, I've got to get these numbers right. But anyway, we're up around the 45,000 mark, I think. So on a per monthly basis, that must be something different. But anyway, the point is that there's a big difference between these numbers and those numbers there. Okay, and then if you look at the UK graph, the slaughter, it's a much flatter graph, okay? So, okay, sure, you're producing more in these latter 6 months of your season, right? And less here, but relatively flat. And so I guess what I'm saying here is that your pasture growth curve doesn't really translate well into your production curve. And I guess that kind of just raises the question for me as to, well, are there periods within the UK season when it's much less profitable to be producing lamb, and why would you be doing that? But if you look at the Australian similar sort of thing, you'd actually see a pretty flat curve, both for the pasture curve and for the slaughter curve. So they don't have the seasonal issues that New Zealand and the UK have. So that's just kind of something for people to keep in the back of your mind, something to think about. Yes, there's opportunity for the counter-seasonal supplies to markets from each of us. And also, is there a profitability opportunity in here? Or is there something I don't understand about UK sheep meat production, which is probably the more likely explanation. So now this here is a simplified graph, obviously, of where it is that we send product, you know, legs mainly to Europe, forequarters to North Asia and Middle East, and middles into Europe and also into North America and others. But the point really is that I'm trying to make here is, and it's been made by the other speakers, is the diversity of product, the ability to sell products, i.e. individual products, into the market where the value is maximized, right? And that's obviously the case with these meat cuts I'm talking about, but probably even more so the case with the fifth quarter products such as offals and things where a relatively lower value in a Western diet and a much higher value in Asian markets, for example. So that's really just kind of a picture which shows you actually it's a lot more complicated than you think probably. But anyway, the point is quite simple, is why not just ship carcasses like we used to, and I'll show you shortly how that used to work. It's the fact is that different people in different countries and cultures value different parts of the carcass differently, right? And that provides you an opportunity to optimize your value, right? And the additional value is such that it covers more than just covers the cost of cutting the product in market, right? We had to do this when the UK joined the EU, so it's all your fault. We're doing this now. And we had to develop a chilled technology in order to be able to ship chilled products, because that was the way the market was moving. There was a period there where people were getting very concerned about the significant difference between the value in chilled or fresh product and that of frozen product. Now that's tended to fluctuate quite a bit, and sometimes they're about the same price, but sometimes the difference can be quite substantial. And so it was necessary for New Zealand, who again, with the help of the EU regulations, where EU auditors are extremely strict on hygiene requirements, were able to get our food hygiene standards to such a high level that we're able to develop a technology for chilled product, which allowed us to ship product to the other side of the world, which was really the major market for us at the time, with some shelf life available. So this is the evolution of that. See, in 1970-71, right? We've got frozen cuts here, and the rest of it was in carcasses. Okay, through the 90s, we then start to look at the chilled product. This is when we started developing the chilled technology through a whole lot of research and development, which we had to carry out in order to be able to achieve that. And now we have like very few carcasses, mainly to China, a lot of frozen cuts, a lot of frozen some frozen boneless, and now chilled product as well. All right, so that's the evolution, and it's been brought about A, by the market conditions, B, the market access we've had, and C, the technologies that have had to be developed in order to achieve that, right? So talking now about where we got to as far as recent events are concerned in market access. So Phil has talked about where we are with quota utilization. So go back up again. We'll see that in 2019, 2020, 2019 was around about 50% utilization. 2020 was 47% utilization. And, you know, if we mark in when New Zealand signed their free trade agreement with China, you'll possibly see what's actually been the major reason for that. And that's been the ability for us to diversify product away from the European market and the UK market. And what that has also meant is that a lot of the cuts, which previously obviously were lower value cuts going into Europe, are now no longer going into Europe, but instead are going to Asia, which has overall increased the value of the European market, right, for us and for you, in terms of the types of product that we're selling into the market. Tends to be higher value products now. So that is what I guess having additional market access can mean. Okay, so if we look at the evolution here, even back as far only as 2009, 2010, UK was our largest market, but since then it's been China, UK, then the USA, with obviously a number of European countries here in the mix as well. So, I mean, Phil mentioned it in his talk. He said, you know, the importance of exports allows for carcass balance, right? Allows you to flatten your peak of production, so you're able to export your peak of production overseas, and to maximize value, that is to get the maximum return for the individual cuts. Right? Okay, so hang on a second, I'll just shift myself here. So Brexit provides you an opportunity to organise your trade agreements according to your priorities. This is something which is perhaps not being talked about much. It's been, you know, there's been talk about the fact that the UK is not as big as Europe, and therefore, you know, how can we expect a better free trade agreement? Well, the fact of the matter is, I guess, is that you guys can now focus specifically on your own priorities, rather than having to share the priorities of Spain and Germany and Slovenia and the like. So you can get much more focus into your trade agreements. You can have much more bespoke, if you like, trade-offs between what it is that you want to get access for and what you might want to give access for, right? How much the UK government trade priorities and strategy reflect your priorities is up to you. And I know that your organisations like the NSA and NFU and others put pressure on the government to have government policy reflect your priorities and needs. But in terms of getting overseas trade agreements which will suit your sector, you have to make friends with the government. And that means that you have to have an understanding and agree some rules. Basically, you've got to get your UK trade negotiators to think that getting access for the sheep meat sector is relatively straightforward and easy, because they have all the support they need from the sector. The sector provides them with all of the information and support that they need. And furthermore, that the sector also knows how the game is played and is not making demands upon the trade negotiators which they are not able to fulfill and never will be able to fulfill, because it's just not possible under WTO rules or whatever. So if you want to improve market access, I say you've got to play by the rules. If you don't, you won't be taken seriously. If you try not to play by the rules, what goes around comes around. People will treat you the same way. And now that you're not protected by the EU, it's likely that you'll have to take some principled positions, i.e. that is, you'll need to think about making sure that your rules are risk and science based. New Zealand has always been in a slightly different situation, that we're a smaller country and don't have the political or economic power that the UK does. And we've kind of had to learn how to develop and thrive within an environment which doesn't allow for the use of power, naked power, if you like, and which, you know, is a rules-based system, and the rules are ones which give everybody a fair crack. If you move from a science base, you need to be warned, it's a slippery slope, right? Because then people are able to start to think up reasons as to why they won't let your product in, which has nothing to do with rationality, and that's not a place you want to be. So put bluntly, you can't put in place non-science-based regulations domestically and then expect others to give you market access, right? So that's something that I think you'll need to think about, and it means that you'll need to reassess your positions possibly on things like GMOs, growth hormones, country of origin labelling, carcass washes, and animal welfare. So that might not be happy news, but I seriously think that you will need to examine those things and think very much on the way, I guess, that we have to think is that what would happen, what would we think if those rules were applied to us? If we were trying to export to a country and they decided that they were going to make up some rules which said we couldn't access it, but those rules were either not rational or discriminatory or any of those kinds of things. The other bit of, I guess, advice, if I can give it, is that you don't want to have your brand standards enshrined in law. And the reason for that is, and that means that you need to make your regulations set a bottom line, but they don't necessarily, aren't necessarily your brand standards. Your brand standards may well be above that, but you don't want your brand standards enshrined in law because they're not flexible. Law is not flexible enough, right? And you have to have your government agreeing with you to change them. Now, even then, they might agree with you, but it may not be high on their political agenda to make the changes that you want as an industry when you're wanting to respond to market situations. So that's, I guess, another bit of unasked for advice. Country of origin branding. Well, first of all, it has its benefits and risks. So it does provide you with scale and the ability to get multiple funding streams for your promotional activity. It allows for collaboration across your value chain and within your national borders, and no doubt in your situation, that's also between your regions. But it exposes everybody to individual risks. In some respects, you are subject to the performance of your worst performer, who potentially is a risk to your reputation. So you need to think about that. It's not Joe Bloggs in Suffolk or somewhere who's responsible. It's Great Britain, or the UK, which will be held responsible if there's a food hygiene or disease scare or whatever. But the fact of the matter is that it's unavoidable. So regardless of whether you think it's a good idea or not, you're going to be exposed to your country's brand. And quality systems to manage your exposure are critical and require industry and government collaboration. So in New Zealand, recently we've developed this farm assurance program, New Zealand's national farm assurance program. The participating members make up 95% of our production base. Ideally, it would be everybody, but the crucial thing is actually it is voluntary participation. But of course, at the same time, we need everybody to be part of it. So that's kind of an interesting work of art in getting everybody's support on board for a national scheme. And it covers the farm environment, people and biosecurity, but it supports our brands, the Taste Pure Nature brand, which we are rolling out in western parts of the United States and in selected cities in China, and Savina, which is the deer industry venison brand. Okay, so is there an opportunity there for UK and New Zealand standards alignment? If, for example, bearing in mind that pasture curve I showed you earlier and the slaughter curves, we were to collaborate in market, if you like, then the people within that market may well not want to necessarily distinguish between New Zealand and UK produced sheep meat. They just may want to be able to say to their supermarket or to their purchasers, I'm going to supply you all round sheep meat which meets these standards. And therefore, if New Zealand and UK standards are aligned, then it would be possible for each of us to supply into that supply chain during the period in our seasons when it is most profitable to do so, and maintain and encourage an all year round supply of best in season global sheep meat from United Kingdom and New Zealand. So that's me, and hopefully that's been useful, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ben. Very, very interesting. You won the prize for the snazziest graph there in the middle there. It's very interesting, and some very good points, especially about the non-science-based regulation, which seems to be quite a challenge in this country. We've got quite a few questions coming in here. This one is from Brian Griffiths. I have the greatest respect for both Phil and Mike and no desire to start a fight, but what more would Mike like to see Phil's team do to help?
Yeah, well, I have respect for you too, Brian. Look, the AHDB has got its challenges, which it's dealing with at the moment, going through a process. And I have to say, I think with the changes at the top of that organisation, there is every opportunity that there's some substantial change will happen. And our responsibility is to get involved with that debate and make sure that the right changes are made in the right places. Where Phil can and is a great help to us, let's give Phil and the HCC credit in Wales, where they do help us, is in opening conversations with people in different parts of the world who we wouldn't ordinarily be able to get to meet. You know, we're a relatively small organisation. It costs a lot of money, and where they have relationships in place and they can leverage things to open opportunities for us, that is the biggest help that they can deliver for us. However, what Phil and anybody else's in a levy board's responsibility is for nailing the deal down and doing the job at the end of the day. Our responsibility is, when the door's been opened ajar for us, is to put our efforts into stepping through that door and nailing the deal down. And we have to accept that those are our responsibilities. We either get out there and do it ourselves, you know, with the help of people like Phil, or we stand on the sidelines and moan about it.
You want to come back, Phil, or are you?
Not really, Kevin. I mean, Mike's right in terms of, I see our role as getting the access and having those dialogues and then making the connections. And Mike's absolutely right. You know, it's then down to industry to grasp the nettle and do the deal. And
we have a responsibility as farmers to produce correctly, good regulation, but recording, you know, and making sure that we do our side of it, and also a good livestock information program so we can record everything and prove our health status to other countries, isn't it? But just moving to it was running through my mind about shelf life, Ben, and what's your maximum shelf life now on your chilled lamb? And we've got a question here from Jan to link into that. Are we here in the UK able or willing to invest in the technology required to gain access to Middle East and Asian markets, for example, in improving shelf life of the product? So if you could just start on that, Ben.
Well, I think the standard shelf life is 12 weeks.
I had heard that you've got one up to 16, is that right?
Well, yes, we do beef up to 16, and we can probably do better than 12, but you know, obviously, as those numbers, as that shelf life extends, the risk increases. So, you know, and your costs. So you just, you know, keeping it at 12 weeks is kind of like working okay for the moment. We are starting to run into problems, of course, now with slower shipping globally, right? And that's another reason which probably people don't appreciate so much, is that part of the reason why product is being diverted through to Asia. So shipping times are much shorter, right? And so your shelf life period is extended, and you're not taking the risks going into the European market that you have on the shelf life with shipping delays and the like, where you're potentially going to lose product. So risk is as important component of the reduction in incentives to Europe as is the price and access.
Mike, where would you be as a company with that kind of?
Yeah, well, our standard shelf life, just to give everybody an understanding of the difference, is about 30 days, you know, and what happens is when you turn up around the world, you know, let's take the Middle East as a market example, and, you know, you've got a leg of UK lamb and a leg of New Zealand lamb. They're both great products. They both taste really good. They both make the same sustainability claims. You know, they're both grass fed. They both have the same nutritional values. One has a 90-day shelf life and one has a 30-day shelf life. If you're the buyer, which one are you going to buy? Because the price is the same. And neither Ben nor us want the price to come down because we want to get that value back to our farmers. So we as an industry have to take seriously challenges like shelf life. And that is about bacterial loading. It's not just what happens in the abattoir, it's how stock is presented and how clean it is. It's the process down the line, it's the packaging and the transport. So it's right the way through. What I thought was really interesting in Ben's commentary, of course, New Zealand had to put the time and effort into sorting it out 20 or 30 years ago out of a position of, well, you know, desperation and crisis. Far too often as an industry, we only act and do things when we're desperate. That is rarely the best time to make strategic investments. Much better to make decisions from a position of strength. And I would argue, as I did in my presentation, that the very fact that we still have a European market and access to it does not mean we should sit back and say, it's fine, we can just carry on what we're doing. We are now, whether we like it or not, in a global market, and we need to find more imaginative ways to work in those markets and to invest in technologies that are going to help us be able to deliver the same sort of product standards as New Zealand, and that means shelf life. I see somebody else has bunged up a question about Red Tractor and how important is that to export markets. Although they've signed it anon, I suspect I know who it is. We don't sell anything because it's Red Tractor. We don't earn a single extra euro cent on any product because it's Red Tractor. In fact, Red Tractor standards effectively give us our license to enter the marketplace, but consumers don't see those as being added value opportunities. They see it as that is our base expectation. And I think we've got to get our heads around this as farmers. If we're going to enter the arguments and discussions about things like sustainability and biodiversity and nutritional value, then we have to, it's a much more intellectual argument. And simply standing there and saying we produce to the best standards in the world and produce the best quality does not make a jot of difference at the end of the day.
Phil, I know it's slightly out of your department in a way, but we've had a fair few questions in about your balanced campaign and how it's been attacked by the vegans. I don't know if you just want to touch on that and just sort of cover that.
Yeah, sure. So as part of having a social media campaign, of course, you put these things up on Twitter, and I want to make it clear, I'm not a social media expert. So these campaigns, you're trying to access as many people as possible. It's a very cheap and a very effective way to market things. And we've had 15 million impressions to date. But part of that is the vegan lobby or the activist lobby are also pretty sophisticated with some clever people. So they've launched a campaign to try and flood our open Twitter feed. And that's the purpose of having one of these things. And it's a side effect of the way that media stream works, is that they can also post comments on the website. Now, if they're offensive or objectionable, you can take them down, but you can't actually stop them doing that kind of thing. So, I mean, our role here, whilst they have their Veganuary campaign, our role here is to promote an alternative picture, and we'll continue to do that. And the social media aspects are a very effective way to do it, but it does come with risks, and you can't manage all the risks all of the time. And that's just the way that works, and we see that across lots of things in terms of social media content.
Could we just briefly touch on the third country status, health certificates, and hellish paperwork? We need to keep it fairly brief. I don't want to make this a whole, but yeah, just sort of go around. Should we start with you, Mike?
Oh, it's a bugger's muddle. That's the quick response to it. And somebody put in a question about whether the AHDB could do more to help us practically with it. In reality, what is happening is that the rules and the regulations are not clear. They're not clear. And people in different places, whether that's in the UK or indeed the other side of the channel on the continent, choose to interpret the rules how they see fit. So you've got this confusion of what the rules are, and then a difference of interpretation. And that is a nightmare scenario. The reality is we are back to doing literally hard copy, wet signature certificates. So rather than using technology to help us smooth the flow of information, we've gone back 25 years into doing things on bits of paper. So the system is not fit for purpose. It's open to interpretation, and the rules are not clear. So that's a recipe for disaster. However, there's nothing anybody else is going to do about tidying up. The only thing that we can do is just get stuck in and try and create the relationships across that chain of supply and find a way to make it work. And it changes literally every day at the moment.
Bill?
Yeah, I mean, the paperwork's difficult. I'll talk about it from a processor's point of view. We're picking up everyday issues with paperwork, export loads delayed. One of the big challenges actually is the groupage system, whereby a UK processor historically would have sent a lorry to continental Europe with 10 different customers' loads on. No health certificate, straight through, as simple as moving a load to Birmingham as it is to Berlin. Now they have to have 10 separate export health certificates. There's a risk of failure at any one of those certificates because it's new and people are learning, so it's a learning curve. If any one of those fail, the whole load rejected, the lorry full. And in addition to that, each certificate is costing in the order of around 150 quid. So if you're sending one pallet of goods to a single recipient as part of a load of 10 separate pallets, not enough product on that pallet to spread the cost, and the risk of having a failure on any one of the certificates, and therefore the total load being rejected, is huge. A number of shippers have starting to refuse groupage type loads. So I see that paperwork issue as being particularly impactful on the medium and smaller sector, the artisan guys that demand a high value, or those medium-sized businesses that aren't shipping whole lorry loads, and that will have an impact. So that's an issue that I'd flag up as being one that of concern. I must say right now we have a live survey for the processing sector to feed back their experience to date, so we can feed that back into government to try and resolve or at least expand the dialogue and discussion around this. I'm seeing Mike nod. I'm hoping he's filled in his response.
Ben, where are you with your exports worldwide with paperwork and health certificates, and just touch a little bit on what you're doing in Northern Ireland at the minute?
Okay, well, I guess for us it's business as usual, right? So these requirements are in place for third countries all over the world, right? And so what you guys are experiencing now is the situation, albeit I appreciate a little more confused perhaps for everybody than before, but what actually is generally the case all around the world in terms of having to have your certification and paperwork all sorted out, etc., and everything absolutely spot on in order to be able to get across borders. And so, as far as we're concerned, that's the way things would be happening under normal circumstances, and I'm sure it's going to take just a little while for things to settle down between the UK and the EU. I guess it's perhaps a different situation in the sense that the EU are now not your friend, whereas perhaps they used to be. They're going to treat you like a third country, just like everybody else. Right? In Northern Ireland, we have a special situation where, and it's not just for us, it's also for all a lot of UK businesses putting product into Northern Ireland. This at-risk products, the risk of product moving from Northern Ireland into the Republic, and the requirements under the Northern Ireland Protocol has meant that certification issues are not straightforward. Seems to be some questions over whether in fact you can import into the Northern Ireland under a TRQ, a third country TRQ, which was obviously not the situation that we would like to see. So yes, there is some clarification that we need around that for third country, and I imagine also for UK, who are in a rather strange situation, exporting product to Northern Ireland.
We've really run out of time, guys. I know that you've got one there that Mike said he was going to answer live. Can you do that really very quickly, Mike?
About the sustainability issues, yes. Sorry, I can't remember who asked the question.
It's about can we add natural fibre to our list of sustainable characters of lamb and sheep?
And I think it was Catherine. I can't remember. If she emails me directly, I will send her a longer answer. But in a quick explanation, there is much more to sustainability than simply about carbon and greenhouse gas emissions. And we have to think about that whole tranche of stuff, whether it's, biodiversity, whether it's nutritional values, the omega-3, omega-6 balance, which is a critical and human health challenge, is greatly helped by grass-fed red meat. And we have to put all of these elements into the arguments. When you come up against campaigners who are anti-livestock, they will focus on one area because that sharp point gives them more effective campaigning. And that's what Phil's video will experience. What we have to do as an industry is position things in a much broader and more intellectual understanding.
Good. Gentlemen, we have to end it there. Nicola, thank you. Ben, Mike, Phil, thank you very much. Some very interesting thoughts there. And if you've got any more questions, I'm sure if you contact these guys individually, they'll be more than happy to
No problem at all.
answer that. Just a reminder on next week's early morning, just want another Wednesday morning off, an early morning briefing on post-Brexit approaches in the four nations, a united approach. It's very interesting, isn't it? We want to get out there, we want to be a world player, we want to export our lamb where everyone wants it. We don't really want to follow New Zealand, and where they don't go, we'll go and fill their hole. But I wish you all the best of luck in opening up these markets, and we'll gladly come along with you. So thank you everyone for joining us. Sorry we ran over, but some good quality questions to some great speakers. Thank you all very much and have a good day.
Thanks, Kevin.